Good Saturday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for September the 2nd. Today, we are reading together in 1 Kings chapter 8, which is going to be this incredible ceremony and dedication of the temple. It also includes Solomon's prayer to God on behalf of the people. It's a great text. There's a lot within it. We're not going to get too deep into the prayer itself, since it's actually on our schedule for our prayers that we are studying through on Wednesday night in our auditorium class. So I'm not going to dive too deep into the prayer itself. I'll focus more on some things that are found around the prayer and just some of the details about this really and truly incredible day. I shouldn't say day, but event, days that take place surrounding, again, this incredible dedication of the temple. So let's read here in 1 Kings chapter 8 and verse number 1. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse number 1, at that time, Solomon assembled the elders of Israel, all the tribal heads and the ancestral leaders of the Israelites before him at Jerusalem, in order to bring the ark of Yahweh's covenant from the city of David, that is Zion. So all the men of Israel were assembled in the presence of King Solomon in the month of Ethanim, which is the 7th month at the festival. All the elders of Israel came, and the priest picked up the ark. The priests and the Levites brought the ark of Yahweh, the tent of meeting, and the holy utensils that were in the tents. King Solomon and the entire congregation of Israel, who had gathered around him and were with him in front of the ark, were sacrificing sheep, goats, and cattle that could not be counted or numbered because there were so many. Verse number 6, the priest brought the ark of Yahweh's covenant to its place into the inner sanctuary of the temple, to the most holy place beneath the wings of the cherubim. Remember, there were these two huge cherubim that spanned, I think, 15 feet in length, and the outer wing was touching the wall, and the inner wings were touching one another. So that's where they're placing the Ark of the Covenant here. For the cherubim were spreading their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubim covered the ark and its poles from above. The poles were so long that their ends were seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but they were not seen from outside the sanctuary. They are still there today. Nothing was in the ark except the 2 stone tablets that Moses had put there at Horeb, where Yahweh had made a covenant with the Israelites when they came out of the land of Egypt. When the priests came out of the holy place, the cloud filled Yahweh's temple, and because of the cloud, the priests were not able to continue ministering, for the glory of Yahweh filled the temple. Then Solomon said, Yahweh said he would dwell in total darkness. I have indeed built an exalted temple for you, a place for your dwelling. The king turned around and blessed the entire congregation of Israel while they were standing. He said, Blessed be Yahweh, God of Israel. He spoke directly to my father David, and he has fulfilled the promise by his power. He said, since the day I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city to build a temple in among any of the tribes of Israel, so that my name would be there. But I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. My father David had his heart set on building a temple for the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel. But Yahweh said to my father David, since your heart was set on building a temple for my name, you have done well to have this desire. Yet you are not the one to build it. Instead, your son, your own offspring, will build it for my name. Yahweh has fulfilled what he promised. I have taken the place of my father David, and I sit on the throne of Israel as Yahweh promised. I have built the temple for the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel. I have provided a place there for the ark, where Yahweh's covenant is that he made with our ancestors when he brought us out of the land of Egypt. Then Solomon stood before the altar of Yahweh in front of the entire congregation of Israel and spread out his hands toward heaven. He said, so this is the prayer. He said, Yahweh, God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below, who keeps the gracious covenant with your servants who walk before you with all your heart. You have kept what you have promised to your servant, my father David. You spoke directly to him, and you fulfilled your promise by your power as it is today. Therefore, Yahweh, God of Israel, keep what you have promised to your servant, my father David. You will never fail to have a man to sit before me on the throne of Israel. If only your sons take care to walk before me as you have walked before me. Now, Yahweh, God of Israel, please confirm what you have promised to your servant, my father David. But will God indeed live on the earth? Even heaven, the highest heaven, cannot contain you, much less this temple I have built. Listen to your servant's prayer and his petition, Yahweh, my God, so that you may hear the cry and the prayer that your servant prays before you today, so that your eyes may watch over this temple night and day toward the place where you said, my name will be there, and so that you may hear the prayer that your servant prays toward this place. Hear the petition of your servants and your people Israel, which they pray toward this place. May you hear in your dwelling place in heaven. May you hear and forgive. When a man sins against his neighbor and is forced to take an oath, and he comes to take an oath before your altar in this temple, may you hear in heaven and act. May you judge your servants, condemning the wicked man by bringing what he has done on his own head, and providing justice for the righteous by rewarding him according to his righteousness. When your people Israel are defeated before an enemy, because they have sinned against you, and they return to you and praise your name, and they pray and plead with you for mercy in this temple, may you hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel. May you restore them to the land you gave their ancestors. When the skies are shut and there is no rain because they have sinned against you, and they pray toward this place and praise your name, and they turn away from their sins because you are afflicting them, may you hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your servants and your people Israel, so that you may teach them to walk on the good way. May you send rain on your land that you gave your people for an inheritance. When there is famine in the land, when there is pestilence, when there is blight or mildew, locust or grasshopper, when their enemy besieges them in the land and its cities, when there is a plague or illness, every prayer or petition that any person or that all your people may have, they each know their own affliction. As they spread out their hands toward this temple, may you hear in heaven, your dwelling place, and may you forgive, act, and give to everyone according to all their ways, since you know each heart. For you alone know every human heart, so that they may fear you all the days they live on the land you gave their ancestors. Even the foreigner who is not of your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name, for they will hear your great name, strong hand, and outstretched arm, and will come and pray toward this temple. May you hear in heaven, your dwelling place, and do all according to sorry about that, lost my place here. May you hear from your dwelling place and do all according to all the foreigner asks. Then all peoples of earth will know your name, to fear you as your people Israel do, and to know that this temple I have built bears your name. When your people go out to fight against their enemies, wherever you send them, and they pray to Yahweh in the direction of the city you have chosen, and the temple I built for your name, may you hear their prayer and petition in heaven and uphold their cause. When they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you are angry with them and hand them over to the enemy, and their captors deport them to the enemy's country, whether distant or nearby, and when they come to their senses in the land where they are deported and repent and petition you in their captors' land, we have sinned and done wrong. We have been wicked. And when they return to you with all their heart and all their soul in the land of their enemies who took them captive, and when they pray to you in the direction of their land that you gave their ancestors, the city you have chosen, and the temple I have built for your name, may you hear in heaven, your dwelling place, their prayer and petition and uphold their cause. May you forgive your people who sinned against you and all their rebellions against you. And may you grant them compassion before their captors so that they may treat them compassionately, for they are your people and your inheritance. You brought them out of Egypt, out of the middle of the iron furnace. May your eyes be open to your servant's petition and to the petition of your people Israel, listening to them whenever they call to you. For you, Lord Yahweh, have set them apart as your inheritance from all the peoples of the earth, as you spoke through your servant Moses when you brought our ancestors out of Egypt. When Solomon finished praying this entire prayer and the petition to Yahweh, he got up from kneeling before the altar of Yahweh with his hands spread out toward heaven, and he stood and blessed the whole congregation of Israel with a loud voice. Blessed be Yahweh. He has given rest to his people Israel according to all he has done. Not one of all the good promises he made through his servant Moses has failed. May Yahweh our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he not abandon us or leave us so that he causes us to be devoted to him, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commands, statutes, and ordinances which he commanded our ancestors. May my words with which I have made my petition before Yahweh be near Yahweh our God day and night. May he uphold his servant's cause and the cause of his people Israel as each day requires. May all the peoples of the earth know that Yahweh is God. There is no other. Be wholeheartedly devoted to Yahweh our God, to walk in his statutes and keep his commands as it is today. The king and all Israel with him were offering sacrifices in Yahweh's presence. Solomon offered a sacrifice of fellowship offerings to Yahweh, 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. In this manner, the king and all the Israelites dedicated Yahweh's temple. On the same day, the king consecrated the middle of the courtyard that was in front of Yahweh's temple, because that was where he offered the burnt offering, the grain offering, and the fat of the fellowship offerings, since the bronze altar before Yahweh was too small to accommodate the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, and the fat of the fellowship offerings. Solomon and all Israel with him, a great assembly from the entrance to Hamath to the brook of Egypt, observed the festival at that time in the presence of Yahweh our God, 7 days, and 7 more days, 14 days. On the 15th day, he sent the people away. So they blessed the king and went to their homes rejoicing and with happy hearts for all the goodness that Yahweh had done for his servant David and for his people Israel. And that is 1 Kings chapter 8, which again is this incredible scene of the dedication of the temple. So we'll just lay this out. What takes place here seems to be taking place about 11 months after the completion of the temple. So about 11 months after the temple has been finished, now they are able to get around to actually dedicating. I don't necessarily think this was them dragging their feet, more so as it seems like this was a pretty big deal, and that there were a lot of logistical things that had to be figured out, whether it be moving the ark from where it had been previously in the stronghold of David to the temple itself and getting it set up, or whether it was collecting, 220,000 cattle or whatever that crazy number was. Let's see, going back to verse 63, at 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. That's a lot. Would probably take a bit of time to gather those things together. So it isn't, on Monday the temple's done, Tuesday they're dedicating it. It has taken some time, and it seems that then as well that the temple had not been open for what we might call business. It was not open to do the things that you will see later on, things being done in the temple, or to do the things that would have been done previously in the tabernacle, the daily sacrifices and such. Those things were not being done, and part of that might be because the ark wasn't there yet. God's presence wasn't actually there in the temple yet, because we know the ark was God's footstool, and where it was believed to be where God's presence was. So it needed to get where it needed to be. So they took it from, again, this stronghold of David, whatever that location was, and moved it here into the temple specifically. So there's some interesting things about that. Number one, is verse number 9, that nothing was in the ark except the two stone tablets that Moses had put there at Horeb. But we remember there were some other things that were in the ark previously, like the staff of Aaron that had budded blossoms, like the jar of manna from the wilderness wanderings. I might also think about the rats and the tumors that were put in there by the Philistines. Where's this other stuff at? Because it says that only the two stone tablets are there. That's just an interesting thing. I don't know if I really have a good answer for where those things went. Maybe they were taken whenever the ark was not in possession of Israel as it should have been. I just don't know. It's just interesting to note that the only thing left in the ark at this time were the two stone tablets. Also note that once the ark was in place, we see now the cloud filling Yahweh's temple. And because of the cloud, the priests were not able to continue ministering. They were unable to stand before such a holy God, it seems. They were unable to do so. Just recognizing the incredible glory that Yahweh possesses. At this point, Solomon stands up and he speaks before God, just speaks about everything that had been done, how Yahweh had brought them out of Egypt, how Yahweh had made promises to David, and how he was able to act upon those promises. All that is laid out before. Basically, these are just the introductory remarks to let the people know, and of course express to Yahweh his understanding of what was taking place here. The text says, beginning in verse 22, that Solomon stood before the altar of Yahweh in front of the entire congregation of Israel and spread out his hand toward heaven. So he begins this prayer, which ends up being one of the longest prayers that we have recorded within Scripture. He begins with his hands raised, standing before the altar. Now, it's just interesting that once we skip over to verse 54, that we see when Solomon finished praying his entire prayer and petition to Yahweh, he got up from kneeling before the altar of Yahweh with his hands spread toward heaven. So it seems that he began standing, but by the time this prayer ended, he had actually made his way down to being on his knees. Just interesting to see, even within this single prayer, the different postures that are found within the prayer. And also just to note that the raising of hands is something that we read about in the New Testament. 1 Timothy 2, I believe it is, talks about lifting up holy hands to God in prayer. It seems that it's not just a figurative thing, but it actually is a literal posture that can be taken before God. And I think we actually see within the prayer itself why that is the case, why it seems the practice was during the days of Israel to not do as we do, to bow our heads in prayer, but actually to lift up one's eyes to God in prayer. And it has to do with where they believe God to be. Within this prayer, and I'm not going to break it down entirely because we're going to do that here, I don't know, in a couple of months or so in our study through biblical prayer. But I just want to note that it seems very obvious that the temple was a place of mediation between God and his people. So I want to note verse 29, verse 30, verse 31, verse 33, verse 35, verse 38, verse 42, verse 44. Let's see here, verse 48 again, 48. Think that is it. So all these different places talk about the people either coming to the temple to pray, or praying in the direction of the temple, or even just praying in the direction of the land where the temple resided. Why? Well, because that's where God is. So it was very natural for them to just turn to where God is, or to where God's presence resided, and to speak to God in that way. Prayer for Solomon and prayer for so many of those in the Old Testament seems very, very much so, again, to be a real conversation. No, we might not hear back from God himself, but we are very much speaking to God. It's not just that we're speaking to ourselves. We're not speaking to ourselves. We are truly speaking to God. We are conversating with him in this moment. We certainly see Solomon doing that here, but we also see how this was something that would be done in a number of different situations as well, where people would speak to God, again, either coming to the temple where his presence was, or at the very least turning toward the temple, or turning toward the land of Israel. Solomon finishes up his public portion of this by blessing the people in verses 54 through 61. He it's interesting here that it seems to be at this point in verse 56, blessed be Yahweh. He has given rest to his people according to all he has promised. Not one of the good promises he made through his servant Moses has failed. It seems that now, finally, there is rest, which you might be able to say then that the Exodus is over. That for hundreds of years, they have still been in sort of Exodus mode, not having rest, not truly being settled in the land. But now that Yahweh has a permanent dwelling, now that they have peace all around them, now you might be able to say that the Exodus has finally concluded. And what does this show? This shows that God is the great promise keeper. He promised that this would happen, and he certainly brought it to fruition. And Solomon goes on to continue to ask God that he would continue to be with them. May Yahweh our God be with us. May he not abandon us. May the words of my petition be heard before Yahweh at all times. Again, there's that continued desire from Solomon. I would argue that this, by far, chapter 8 is the height of Solomon's spirituality. If we just had chapter 8 in a vacuum, we would think that Solomon is one of the most spiritually minded people that's ever walked the face of the earth. Unfortunately, we're going to see that's not the case. But at least here in this moment, he is very spiritually focused as he needs to be and is leading the people in that direction as well. Again, his desire is for Yahweh to continue to be with them and to continue to bless them, and they would continue to be able to have this wonderful relationship with him. Now, once all the speaking is over, we see that they begin offering all these sacrifices. They offer burnt offerings, grain offerings, and these fellowship offerings. Remember, the fellowship offering was one in which the people participated in the eating of the meat that had been sacrificed. So what we have here is this incredible feast that begins to take place. But you got to think, how could they offer 22,000, or excuse me, 22,000 plus 120,000, do a little math, 34,000 animals? How could they offer that on that one altar there in the courtyard? Well, it seems that what Solomon has done is actually consecrated. He consecrated the middle of the courtyard that was in front of Yahweh's temple. I'm going to assume so that they can bring in more altars and offer more animals. But of course, this takes a long time. It takes 2 weeks, 14 days. They are feasting and celebrating and enjoying the blessings of God here in this moment. And finally, on the 15th day, the people are sent away. But notice they turn around, they bless the king. For truly, the people are happy. This is a good moment. Take a snapshot of this day, this 2 weeks or so, 15 days or so. This is a high point in Israel's history. They bless the king, and then they go to their homes rejoicing and happy, or rejoicing and with happy hearts for what? For what Solomon has done? No, for all the goodness that Yahweh had done for his servant David and for his people Israel. This was not a celebration of what Solomon had done. This is a celebration of what Yahweh had done, and a prayer that Yahweh would continue to be with and bless his people. So that's what we see here in 1 Kings chapter 8, a wonderful chapter. Man, I wish we could just continue riding this high throughout the entirety of the Solomon chapter of Israel's history, but unfortunately it's not the case. But enjoy this for now, and we'll see what lies ahead here in the short future. If you have any questions or comments about this text, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And I hope that you'll take this text and that you'll use it to motivate you, being thankful for the fact that we no longer have to go to a specific place or turn in a certain direction in order to pray to God, but that wherever we are, whatever we're doing, we can take time to communicate with God, because we are now the temples in which his spirit dwells, and we have Jesus serving as our wonderful mediator. Praise be to God for that, and I hope that you certainly take advantage of that today. Have a great rest of your Saturday, everyone. We'll be back at it again tomorrow, reading together from 1 Kings chapter 9. Hope to see you then. Take care, and God bless.